Gail, you've worked for some in revenue cycle for some great organizations over the years. You've mentioned a few of them: Cleveland Clinic, MUSC, Allegheny Health Network. We spent some time at NCO together, UMC, Navigant. Have there been more similarities, would you say, or differences between those different organizations?
Well, I can say and it's certainly not a criticism, it's just an observation. I always want to be clear when I'm sharing an observation, I'm not intending to be critical. Any health system, it's kind of like going to the same movie in a different place, because many of them have the same problems from a process perspective. A lot is driven by what systems they're on. I know that. Of course, now most places are either on Epic or Cerner. So, I happen to have more experience on Epic. But the bottom line is that there are inherent problems. A lot depends on kind of how the medical staff and the medical group that's in that health system is situated, if they're all employees or if they're on contracts. There are a lot of obviously technical differences among the organizations, but when it comes to the revenue cycle processes that need to happen, they're pretty fundamental everywhere you go. So you just have to figure out, how can we make those more efficient, reduce cost, increase return on time. I kind of take the same approach everywhere I go, but I do not see the organizations as the same. I look at them, this is one of the reasons I usually take about a month off between big gigs. Yeah. Is because I need to refresh and I need to realize I'm going someplace new. I can't take any of that old stuff that I learned here or learned there. I need to look at them anew and think about what needs to happen. So I will say, being in a consulting firm as an employee, for instance, with Navigant, or when I merged my first company with Ethos Partners, that is different, quite different. Because you're taking your skills and using them basically at the direction of another person, maybe a senior managing director of a project or something like that. You may be asked to do something that if you say, well, that's not really my sweet spot, sometimes they don't care. You're the person who's been on the bench and you got to go. Yep. And so you're kind of peddling and learning things that you need to know real quickly. But I would say that the healthcare provider setting itself, there are always things that are very similar, and there are some things that are very different. So you just have to look at each one. And of course, geographically, these places are in different states.
Right.
State regulations can be vastly different.
Absolutely.
When I was doing something with Stanford, that's entirely different than doing something in Pennsylvania, right, or Mississippi. So there are a lot of differences, but there's also some very fundamental similarities across. Yeah. But being in the true consulting world for a consulting firm that's not mine is different. Yeah. When it's mine, I'm driving it. Right. I don't have to ask anybody else, what I need to do. So that's one of the things I value about having my own company, is I don't need to ask 500 other people what I need to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. That kind of leads me into my next question. Talk about some of the questions or exercises that you go through when you first start working with an organization to help you evaluate where to begin and specifically what areas need attention. What's sort of a checklist maybe that you go through to let you know it's a good opportunity, but then where to start?
Well, let me step back before that just a tiny bit. One of the first things that has to happen is you have to have a means to get the business, right? So somebody calls me, says, we want to talk to you about, what's going on with our revenue cycle. I typically am going to make a proposal of what I think needs to be done after a rather brief, maybe 1 to 2 day investment of my time in talking to people and getting a sense of what's going on there. Mm-hmm. I typically propose my work, but one of the things that's maybe a little unique about me, I don't really know, but I'm not a fan of dropping off a report. I'll do it. If somebody wants my report, I'm not going to drop 10 pounds on their desk. I'm going to give them what they need what they can actually act on. Sure. I don't need a lot of other stuff. but I'm an execution person. So I'm very likely to say, this is what I propose to do, and I'm the person that needs to do it. I'm proposing myself to do this work. And so that may be a little different, maybe it's not, I can't really say, not knowing how others would approach that. But the first thing, Bill, that I always need to make sure I have a good gauge on is the culture. If you can't get your finger on the pulse of the culture, even if it's a culture you're like, I don't like this culture is not good, whatever, just you need to know what it is, because you're not going to be successful if the culture isn't healthy to begin with.
Sure.
So I hold a lot of town halls right off the bat. Once I get an assignment or I take an assignment, I hold a lot of town halls and I talk to the people. I don't want to hear from the leaders. I'm going to get the canned usual responses. I love them, don't get me wrong, but they're going to tell you what they think you need to know, and that's fine. But I gather questions from line employees and start to get a feel for what's really going on here, and knowing whether I can influence that or not, or how big my challenge is going to be to inspire and or influence the workforce. It can be very challenging. If you can't get the workforce behind you, it's very tough to be successful.
Sure. Oh, that's great. That's great information.
So that's kind of how I kick off, is what's going on here and what is going to be the best means for me to influence it.
Well, and I imagine building the trust with that team too. We see leaders turn over probably more frequently than we ideally would like to see, and the staff. I could see where the staff would take the attitude of, oh, what's he or she going to do any different than what we've had up to this point? How are they going to get the approval to move forward with their plan when all those prior have failed or fallen short? So.
And I can speak to my latest engagement with University of Mississippi Medical Center, and I was so fortunate to speak with Loretta at the last Georgia HFMA meeting.
She was great.
About some of she's wonderful, about some of the work that we have done there. That was a situation where I knew there needed to be a dramatic change culturally. For one thing, I knew the people had about 3 or 4 chief revenue cycle officers in less than 6 years. That's rough on people. How do you build trust and gain loyalty when people think you're going to float in and out? And I'm telling them from the beginning, I'm not your permanent person, right, but I am going to be with you, and we're going to go through this together.
Yep.
We got a journey we're going to take together, and I'm not leaving you until this journey's at a certain stage and it's time for another chief revenue cycle officer to come in and take responsibility for that. So
that's so important.
You have to be willing to commit to that journey with the people, and sometimes it's not as much fun as you'd like it to be. We all, I like to have fun at work, but you still do it, and they see you doing it. They see you doing it with them, and that's what becomes important.
I think that's so important. Willing to roll up your sleeves and get in the trenches with them to come up with a solution. Leading into my next question, there's so many pieces I feel like that are just constantly moving in healthcare, and we're often accused as an industry that's more reactive than proactive. How do you shut out some of the noise of what's going on outside and just really focus on the issues that need to be addressed, not just for today, but for the long-term betterment of the department or the organization?
Well, that's a great question, by the way, because there is a lot of noise and there are a lot of squeaky wheels. And, there's working with department chairs and doctors in an academic setting versus working in an organization where all the doctors are employed and things are done differently. These are some of these differences that we talk about. A lot's the same in the revenue cycle, but organizations and cultures are so different. One of the ways that I turn down the noise is to try, number one, to understand what are the biggest things. You can't eat an elephant except by pieces, right? So what pieces of this elephant can I eat that will have the most impact the soonest? And I think probably everybody else approaches things that same way. But I have to tell you, in our business, it is the easiest thing in the world to get distracted.
Absolutely.
Somebody walks in your office and says, Dr. So-and-so's up in arms about such and such. There goes your day.
Yep.
No, that it didn't have anything to do with what you needed to do. And to get yourself back down to where you need to stay, the way I do it is I look at everything from an order of magnitude perspective. Okay, I got an upset doctor. If I sacrifice my entire day to that, first of all, I don't even know what he's upset about. I usually will give about 15 minutes to the person who came in with this announcement and say, can you give me a very concise rundown on what he or she seems to be upset about?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm constantly listening for what is the order of magnitude. Are they mad about something that happened with a patient, or are they mad about the aging of their AR? You know, always trying to understand how quickly can I address whatever this concern is, and should it overtake my day? Because we can lose days, hours, nights, weeks to the CFO walking in the office and saying something's wrong over here and I need you to immediately turn your attention to this.
Right.
Well, you know, if you get a directive from the person you're reporting to, you're probably going to, that's pretty high order of magnitude.
Absolutely.
I'm still going to ask questions.
Yep.
I have learned that the worst thing you can do is not ask a few questions.
Sure.
To make sure you understand, you know, what's going on here before I devote my entire life to this. Do I understand? Do I even know what the real problem is? The underlying problem.
What's the root cause? What's the root issue?
What's the root cause? So you have to get really efficient at getting to that through conversation, through quick, you know, checking with a few people. And when I hear a criticism about anything, I never agree with it. My rule is I never agree with a criticism of anything because I don't have any facts. If somebody says, oh, so-and-so did such and such, I'm going to say, you know what, that sounds like that's important to find more out about that.
Yeah.
I do need to explore that. Thank you so much for letting me know. So I think those are the two things I do. I'm constantly assessing order of magnitude and what's going to be the impact if I act or don't act immediately, and not assuming that what I'm hearing is factual. I don't assume what I'm hearing is factual ever. I go get information.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So you founded Hritz Management Services in 2012. I believe you had a business even prior to that, but what made you decide to go out on your own and start your own business?
Well, the first time I did it with Barbara Noon. Some people know Barbara Noon. She's a master's level nurse with an BSN in nursing and a master's in business, an MBA. And Barbara and I started our business together. It was Hritz Noon Associates. And we started that 7 years before I started Hritz Management Services. And we merged our company. We reached a point where we had plenty of clients, but it was just two women trying to deliver all the services and market and all that stuff. I didn't want to hire a bunch of people. So we merged with Ethos Partners, which we knew Armand Balsano, Alex Hunter, a lot of those people we had both either individually worked with, or we both knew them, or one of us did. So we felt really comfortable going and merging with their company. And then about 18 months later, they were acquired by Navigant.
Wow.
So I don't, again, no regrets with that, and I was with Navigant for a couple of years, but I just simply prefer to work on my own. And Barbara it's not that I see Barbara often and talk to her all the time. So there was nothing wrong with us. We're great, but she went on and she moved to Asheville. She was married. She remarried. Her first husband passed away. She married and moved to Asheville and went to work with Mission for many years. She is retired at this point, but I didn't need to have a partner at that point, and I knew how to do it. I knew what it took, and I knew how to do it. And I don't start a business unless I got a high-profile client. So I got myself a high-profile client. I retired from Navigant on a Friday and started working at my new client on Monday.
That's great. That's wonderful. That's I'm sure that was it. Well, and you've just gone from place to place, reconnecting in some ways with some of the people that you've known and worked closely with in some capacity over the years in the industry.
Well, and I'm so happy. I really am happy. I was having a discussion with someone yesterday. I'm really happy to report that I've been so blessed with people who call me and say, could you do so and so? Well, if it's got to be me, that it may be a yes or no, depending on what's going on with me. But I also know really talented people in the industry, and I'm not afraid to call them and say, hey, I can't do this, but I think you would be great at it. Do you have any interest? And so I hope that I've perceived that as one of the things that I hope people are generous with me, like Cindy Hundorfine. When I was getting ready to leave Allegheny Health Network, she said, I got a call from Mike Henderson. You remember Mike Henderson? I said, yeah, Dr. Henderson. Where is he now? She said, well, he retired, but then he went back to work as the chief medical officer at University of Mississippi, and he really needs somebody to help him with so-and-so. I said, well, should I give him a call? And she said, oh, that would be so great. So I've always just sort of had something, the next thing just sort of evolve and happen while I'm exiting something else. So that's been a blessing, but I'm not afraid to give other people work.
I'm guessing most of the engagements that you've left, they probably still have the Gail phone, right? Where they pick up, we need to talk. You're on the short list.
Have the Gail phone. And of course, I always say when I'm leaving an engagement, you may not be my active client anymore, but don't you ever think that you can't call me. Because sometimes you need to fill people in on a historical thing. That's right. They're like, Gail, do you know what happened at this time, at this place? Sure, I can, I've got pretty good recall. Yeah. And I became very embedded. That's one of the hazards with my work. You become very attached and very embedded. And when it's time to say goodbye, it can be very difficult. It affects you. It affects you just like you were an employee there, because I'm just as dedicated to my client as if I were an employee. I don't think about them as not, in fact, I'm probably more conscientious about some of those feelings than some employees are, because they are a client. It's not my employer, it's a client, and I have to be on my, I have to be tip top all the time.
Sure. Well, especially if you go into a situation and turn it around and it's a real success story. I mean, that's a feather in your cap. That's something to really be proud of. And, to, like you said, to have to leave it behind to go on to your next one, or because they've gotten to where they needed to get to, I imagine certainly tugs at you a little bit.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's very, and people, I love people. Yeah. So, you don't not know them anymore, but as you leave, your relationship with them changes, and you might not, somebody you saw every day, 3 days a week, you don't see now for months or talk to. So it's just, it has its heartstrings, pulling at your heartstrings moments as well.